Hi, I'm Mark Mather with PRB. Thanks for joining us for our second PRB webinar of 2016, which provides an introduction to Tableau. The presenter for today's presentation is Beth Jarris, and many of you probably participated in Beth's last webinar, which was focused on Excel. In this webinar, Beth's going to provide a brief introduction to the data visualization tool Tableau, focusing on how to structure data for work in Tableau, how to build a basic interactive chart. Tableau is fairly complex, so the goal here is really just to get people started with some basics. And for those of you who are going to be attending the upcoming data workshop in St. Louis, we hope this will give you a foundation that you can build on. Beth is a Senior Research Associate here in PRB's U.S. Programs Department. This webinar is being recorded, so if anybody gets confused about any of the steps or if you have trouble following along, I don't want anyone to panic because you'll always be able to go back and view the recording later. I also want to mention this webinar is being provided through funding from the Annie E. Casey Foundation. If you have any questions that you'd like to submit to Beth during the webinar, please type them into the question box. There should be a control panel there on the right-hand side of your screen. And Beth will try to answer those questions at the end of her presentation, but feel free to type in those questions at any time. If there's any questions that she can't answer or if we run out of time, we have your contact information, so we'll try to get back to you after the presentation today. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Beth.
Great. Thank you, Mark. What I want to go over today is, as Mark described, getting started in Tableau. While this is a fairly basic introduction to Tableau, we will walk through all of the steps to turn your raw data into a completed interactive visualization you could share or post on your website. We'll build a simple chart and a map. Then we'll create a dashboard where we combine the chart and map elements together with title and source notes to create a completed visualization, and I'll show you how to publish that work. And I want to reiterate what Mark said at the outset, that this is intended to be a demo, not a follow along as we go, but the webinar will be recorded, and all of the data in the webinar are available on the Kids Count Data Center. So once the recording is posted, you certainly can go back and walk through the steps at your own pace. Now, before we get started, or before you get started in Tableau, there are a couple of things you need to do. One of them is download and install Tableau Public. You probably will need to create a user account with an email address and a login. It is free. Another thing to keep in mind is that you want to sketch out a rough draft of your visualization. At a minimum, you want to have in mind what question you're trying to answer or story you're trying to tell with your data, and also prepare your data. And I find that this is actually one of the pieces that is the most time-consuming, and we will spend quite a bit of time talking about data structure today. It may seem a little slow and tedious at first, but I promise this is a really important foundation for working with Tableau. One other thing I want to talk about a little before we jump into Tableau specifics is a little bit of perspective. And what you're seeing on the screen is a data product from the 1790 census. And I'm including this here for two reasons. First, figuring out who will use your data and what will be most useful to that user is an issue as old as data itself. Tableau is a great new tool that allows you to create charts, graphs, tables, and maps with a few clicks. You can build quite literally hundreds or thousands of crosstabs in minutes, but that doesn't necessarily mean you should. Keep in mind that sometimes simpler is better. Just because we have the power to do lots of crosstabs doesn't necessarily mean that that's going to be useful to the end user. And then also, Tableau, I will admit, it does not always feel intuitive at the outset. In fact, it might even feel overwhelming at times. But can you imagine how difficult it was to tabulate and display the results of the 1790 census? As we walk today through the basics, and next month you'll have a chance to dig into the Tableau details at the workshop, you'll find that over time Tableau is far simpler than hand glazing pottery, and by the end you may actually think it's easy. So let's talk a little bit about the Tableau interface, because it's a bit different than most other products that we use. There are a handful of screens that you'll see in Tableau. The first one is the Start screen. From the Start screen, you can open a data file. connect to a database, or open recently accessed Tableau projects. Tableau can read in many different types of data, Excel, Access, text, so on and so forth, and you would connect to those through the data connection pane at the far left of that start screen. The next screen we see is the data connection window. On the left is your available data tables. We drag those to what they refer to as the canvas to tell Tableau which one of those tables, which table or tables we want to work with. And then Tableau gives us a data preview. And I should note that this is just a preview at this stage. You can't do any editing of the data cells here. But it is nice to be able to look at the data and sort of a visual check to make sure that you've connected to the correct data set. And then there is the worksheet. So this is the third pane that you will see in Tableau. And this is where we build our charts, tables, and maps. When we load data into Tableau, the software assigns the information into one of two bins. Dimensions, which we see in the top left, are categorical things like groups, location names, race ethnic categories, or other descriptors of the data. We can think of these as crosstab categories, and the icons, as you can see on the screen here, appear in blue. And then the other bin that Tableau assigns is measures, which we see at the bottom left. And those are numeric values. Those are things we can sum, average, count, or otherwise calculate, and those icons appear in green. The canvas is where we will create our data visualization, and data are structured into columns and rows. For any of you who sat in on the Excel webinar last month on pivot tables, this piece of the interface will feel a little bit familiar. There are also filters. For example, we might want to show the data for only one age group or for one state. We can filter the data here. And then there are also pages, which create one chart or map per category. So for example, if we add location to pages, Tableau creates one chart per location for us to flip through. And I'll actually demonstrate this feature later on in the webinar. The Marks card contains many formatting options, things like size, shape, and color, and labeling for our data points. And then there's the Show Me pane, which is where we pick the type of chart that we want to create. And if during the demo you can't see the Show Me pane, you might want to try minimizing the GoToWebinar window in the right-hand side of your screen, because sometimes that overlaps the Show Me pane when we go to Tableau. Now this is one view of a worksheet. To create a data visualization, it's really just as easy as dragging and dropping from the data pane onto the visualization. You'll note here that the Show Me pane is still there, but it's minimized. You can make it bigger or smaller or move it around on the interface. Couple of other things about the worksheet layout. The menu bar and ribbon are set up in a manner very similar to other software that we use, so you'll find things like saving and refreshing data in places that you would expect it to. And a really useful tool is undo. There are two ways to undo things that you've done in Tableau. You can either click on the back arrow on the ribbon or use the keyboard shortcut Control-Z. And I'll admit right now that I use that feature quite a lot. Tableau projects contain worksheet tabs similar to an Excel file, and also new sheet, new dashboard, and new story tabs that can be used to create a new chart or to group those charts together into a dashboard. So now that we've seen a little bit of an overview of the interface and got our terminology straight, let's talk some about data. The data for today's webinar come directly from the Kids Count Data Center. I downloaded information on children in poverty by race and ethnicity. To do that, I went to the Kids Count Data Center page for that indicator and clicked on Raw Data, which downloaded a CSV file for me. Now with that file, we'll review things like data structure, and we'll actually import this data directly into Tableau for today's exercise. A couple of things to think about in working with Tableau is how is your file set up? There are wide or short files, and I'm actually going to go to Excel to show this. Wide files have one row with multiple data points within it. So for example, we have a row for the United States for 2000, and there are poverty rates for American Indian population, Asian and Pacific Islander, Black or African American, so on and so forth. Identifiers There's one record per identifier, and the information can include multiple data points. In long format data, and this is probably what we're more likely or more used to working with, there's one record per data point. So as you can see, there's data for the United States, American Indian in 2000, data for the United States for American Indian in 2001, so on and so forth. The identifiers repeat within the data set. And I will say that this format, this long form, number one, is most useful in Tableau. You can use wide data, but it's a little more cumbersome to work with. So long form is best, generally speaking. And the nice thing is that that dovetails well with the work that we do. Data that we download from the Kids Count Data Center come in this format already. And any information that you're uploading to the Kids Count Data Center as well, you're probably packaging in this format. So there's sort of a nice blend there. We also want to talk about reviewing the data. There are a few things that you want to think about before you even launch Tableau. Does your data include both detail and totals? Things like, do you have all of the states, DC and Puerto Rico, and also a record for the US? Do you have individual age groups and also records for total? Do you have the race ethnic detail and also records for total population? Because when you are building your data visualization, Tableau is going to sum everything it finds, and so if you have subtotals and totals, you'll want to work with the data differently within Tableau to tell it to include or exclude those totals to avoid double counting. Also, do you have different data types? For example, in the data that I downloaded on child poverty, it includes both number and percent, as you can see here, numbers and percent both within the same file. And also, do we have special characters? Are there NAs, are there S's in fields that you expect to be data? Tableau, when you're loading data, will automatically assign a data type. And so while you can change that, I find it most helpful to do the data cleanup in advance. And so in this case, I would select all of the information and do a find and replace all of those S's with blanks, not a space. It's replacing it with a blank, replace all of those, and replace all of my NAs with blanks, and replace all of those before I even open Tableau and load the data. I would get rid of those special characters. A couple of other things to think about are that your each field needs a column header, and you don't want to have any extra titles at the beginning of your data. So sometimes we get files that look like this with some title or header information on it. We would want to delete that before we load it into Tableau. We want to make sure that each one of these columns has a header on it. And we also want to deal with dates, and this is something that's unique to working with Tableau. The raw data that we download from the Kids Count Data Center has a field for time frame already on it. The problem with that, with respect to Tableau, is that Tableau and also Excel only read time and date fields for time series charts, for line charts. And they think of time and dates using a serial number, not a date. So for example, both Excel and Tableau think of January 1st, 1900 as the number 1, January 2nd, 1900 as the number 2, so on and so forth. January 14th, 2014 would be 41,640. And so if we load the data straight from the Kids Count Data Center into Tableau and it sees the number 2014, it's going to think you're talking about something that happened in July of 1905, which is not exactly what we want. And so there are two ways we can deal with that. One of which is to use the date function, which is equals date, the year, the 4-digit year number, comma, the 2-digit month number, and I would recommend using either January or July here for this annual data, and then the day, so 01 again. And I will show you an example of that. So here I took the year and said equals date, open parentheses, year that's in cell C2, comma, 1 for January and 1, so that I've turned that 4-digit number into a date that Tableau will actually read as a date. Another option that sometimes works and sometimes does not is to change the field header to year. So turn, instead of time frame, put the word year there, and that sometimes is enough for Tableau to read this in as a date instead of reading it in as a number. And I'll show you what those look like in the data once we get started. So those are basically the things that I did to clean up the data. I took out those special characters, the S's and A's, and I added a date field. Everything else that you see is directly downloaded from the Kids Count Data Center. Now it's time to actually launch Tableau and create. And we're going to turn this long, messy data that we just looked at into a visualization that looks like this by the end of the webinar. In fact, let's go to Tableau, to the web, and look at what the final product is going to look like. I've taken that poverty rate data and created a map at the top that shows the poverty rate by state in 2014 by different race and ethnic groups. And these page tabs at the top allow us to tab back and forth between different race and ethnic groups and change the map on the fly. And then there's also a time series chart at the bottom that shows the U.S. poverty rate by race and ethnicity over time. So we'll create these two elements and turn them into a completed visualization. So let's go ahead and launch Tableau. So this is the data connection screen, and I'm going to click on Excel and double-click to open the file that I downloaded and fix the formatting on. I probably should close it before I open it in Tableau. And I want to work with the data that we have in this worksheet called child poverty. I'm going to left-click on it and drag it over to the canvas. I could add additional worksheets. So for example, if I wanted that extra headers table in there, I could also drag that over, and you see that Tableau wants to join those two tables. Joining and how to deal with joined data is beyond the scope of this particular webinar, so I'm actually going to click out of here and drag this back off of my canvas. I really only want to work with the data in this worksheet for now. You'll notice that Tableau automatically shows us a preview of the data that we've selected and a couple of other things. It's brought in that first column of information as the header or the field name for each one of these pieces of data, and it's assigned a data type. So for location, this little ABC means that Tableau is thinking of that as text. For time frame, this number sign shows that Tableau is thinking of it as numeric. A little calendar icon means that it's thinking of it as a date format. We could change these. If you click on the drop-down arrow next to one of those icons, you can actually pick a different data type. But again, I suggest doing as much of this cleanup in advance of opening Tableau as possible, because it's a little bit slow in processing and loading the data if you're trying to change data types on the fly. We can also change the labels. So say, for example, this label here, race, isn't quite as descriptive as I want it to be. This really should be race and ethnicity. You can left or double click on that name and type a change. And that change will carry through the rest of your work. When you're done making any changes, to get started building a data visualization, all you need to do is double click where it says go to worksheet, double click where it says sheet 1, and that opens your first worksheet. We're going to start with a simple time series chart that shows the poverty rate in the U.S. by race and ethnicity. So I'm going to grab time frame and bring it to columns. And you'll notice over here on the Show Me pane that a few different chart types are selected. What Tableau starts to do is, as you add data to your visualization, it gives you options for what chart types are available to you. And I really want to build a line chart, but you'll notice that line chart isn't an option even though I've brought, or the time series chart isn't an option even though I brought time frame to the columns header. And this is that thing I was telling you about earlier with date format. Time frame here is number. And we created this other field, year 2, that is actually the date. So let's bring that over to columns instead. Left click and drag it to columns. And let's add some data and drag data into this crosstab area here. And you'll see now that the line chart does become an option that's available to us. So let's click on that. And we want this information by race ethnicity. So let's grab race ethnicity and bring that to the color. So now we have one line for each of the different race and ethnic groups. But we have numbers here that are really high. This is not the child poverty rate in 2005. 26 million is not a possible rate. And we remember that our data has both numbers and percents in it. So let's filter out our file so that we have only the percent information that we're working with. We'll grab data format and bring that to filters. Click on percent and say OK. And now that's looking a little better. But you will also remember that we have lots of different geographies. We have all 50 states, the District of Columbia, Puerto Rico, and the US all in our data set here. And there are a couple of different ways that we can address this. We could create one time series chart for each geography. If we grab location and drag that to pages, you'll see that it's added this new slider bar and set of arrows. So we have a chart for Alabama. If we left-click Alaska, Arizona, Arkansas, California, so on and so forth, we could scroll down the list and go to Texas. So we have one chart for each geography. Or, if I want to turn that off, I left-click and drag it back to the data pane. I may just want to have one. And in the example that we are working with, we have just the United States. And so let's, instead of creating one page for each state, let's grab location and bring it to filters. And scroll through the list and pick just the United States and say OK. And now we have the time series chart of child poverty rate in the US from 2000 to 2014. And so this is probably about where we want it to be. To change the worksheet name here, we can double-click and type US child poverty rate over time. And that visualization will be available to us when we create our dashboard. One other thing we may want to do, I do not tend to like the default color palette that they give us to work with in Tableau. And so you'll notice on the legend here, there's a little drop-down arrow at the very top. If we left-click on that and say Edit Colors, we can pick a different color scheme. And so if instead of automatic, we choose, for example, the colorblind 10 palette and say Assign palette, and this is an important step. If you just click OK, it won't take. And say OK, it's changed the colors for us. You can also change the color of an individual item. Say, for example, instead of the total appearing in brown, I want that to appear in black. Again, left-click that little arrow, say Edit Colors. And in this case, instead of checking on the color palette, I'm going to double-click on that brown color icon or color chip next to Total. And select black instead and say OK and OK. And now the total line shows up in black. Okay. Now, there's one other thing I want to show you before we build a map. I want to show you some information about sorting data. So let's build a table. I'm going to open a new worksheet by clicking on this new worksheet pane here. It looks like a little chart with a plus sign on the top of it. And in this case, I'm going to bring the year to columns, race ethnicity to rows, and data to crosstabs. Again, I want to filter out just the percents. So bring data to filters and click on percent and say OK. And in the Show Me pane, I'm going to pick this color-coded highlighted table here in the top right. And so now what it's showing me is the sum of poverty rates for American Indians in 2000, 2006, so on and so forth. But again, we've got lots of locations here in this data set. So I'm also going to bring locations over to the crosstab. And now what I see is for each state, I have a table of the child poverty rates over time that's kind of color-coded. One other thing to keep in mind when we're building visualizations is that color does have certain connotations. And in this case, darker green is showing up for the higher values. But we really don't want to imply, but darker green also has this connotation of having more money. And we don't really want to imply that higher areas of higher poverty rate have more money. So we'll probably want to change this color scale. So let's, here in the legend, left click on that arrow, select Edit Colors, and instead of a green color panel, we're going to scroll down and pick the orange and to blue diverging. And again, colors of red and orange tend to be associated with problem areas, and colors of blue tend to be associated with areas that are things that are good. And so we're going to reverse the color scale so that it makes the darker oranges the areas with higher poverty, and the blues, the darker blues, are the areas with lower poverty. And say OK. And we'll see now that really the chart or the table really pops, and you can see areas or states that have pockets or populations that have high poverty rates across different states over time. One other thing you may notice is that there's a lot of dark blue over these empty cells here. One of the features that Tableau offers us is to chart all of the data. And in this case, it's reporting any of those empty cells as though they contain the value 0. What we could say is don't show that information at all. And so we'll bring data to filter and click on next, and then special, and say non-null values. I'm going to go through that one again because it's a little bit quirky. So data comes up to filters, next, special, and non-null values. And I'm going to say OK, and you'll see now that it's just not showing those empty cells, those blank cases on the screen. One other thing we can do, this chart, the way that it, or this table, the way it's set up, is showing us by state the trends in poverty by the different race and ethnic groups. What we might want to do is look across states within a race ethnic group. And so if we take these little, Tableau refers to them as pills. If we take these pills in the row bar, and I left click on race and ethnicity, and I drag it before location, you'll see that it changes the order. Now we have the data grouped by race ethnicity first, and then location. And so we can see, for example, that Asian and Pacific Islander child poverty rates tend to be lower. Black or African American child poverty rates tend to be higher. We're seeing more orange there. And so you can see the patterns across states within race and ethnic groups instead of within a state. And then we can drag location back to the beginning and reset that viz. And we're not going to be using this worksheet in the next step, but we'll keep it there. And last but certainly not least, I want to show you how to create a map. So we're going to create another new worksheet. And let's talk a little bit about data formats. There is one other format I hadn't told you about yet, and it's called the geographic role. If you have a field that's labeled state or that's labeled county, Tableau may already have brought that in as a geography and understands that those are commonly used names for geographies. But we called ours location. And so we need to tell Tableau that this location thing really is a geographic identifier, and Tableau has a lot of mapping power built into it. If we mouse over location and left click and come down to geographic role, you'll see that there are a variety of options. We could map cities, we could map congressional districts, counties, states and provinces, zip codes. In this case, our data are by state and for the US, and so let's click on state province. So we're going to say that location field is really the geographic role of state province. You'll notice that the icon next to location changed from the ABC to a little globe. And if we select location, now in the Show Me pane, you'll see that map is an option. So I'm going to left click on map, and I'm going to bring data to color. And I am going to bring time frame to filter, and I'm going to say I only want the information for 2014. And OK. And so now you can see that we have some information, sort of the map is changing as I'm making changes here. Oh, in addition, I want to say for data format, I only want the %. And say OK. Okay. And again, the color scale here is a little bit problematic. For areas of high poverty, we want those to show up in dark orange. For areas of low poverty, in blue. So let's edit the color palette. Left click, edit colors. Let's use that same orange to blue diverging reversed scale that we used before and apply. Okay. And the last piece is that this is summing up the poverty rate across all of the categories for which we have data. But what I really want to do is create a map that shows the poverty rate by state for each race and ethnic group individually. And so here, I'm going to bring race ethnicity and drag it to pages. And it creates that interactivity for me where I now have maps for each individual race ethnic group. So there's the poverty rate by state in 2014 for the Black or African American youth, for Hispanic or Latino, for non-Hispanic white, for total. And if I go back to the American Indian one, scroll all the way back there, you'll also see, we're thinking we would expect the poverty rates to be higher for that population group, but we're seeing a lot of dark blue. And again, thinking about data, that's because there are a lot of missing values there. And so just like we did before, we want to bring data to filter. And we want to make Tableau ignore those missing values, not map them as though they're 0. So click Next, Special, and non-null values, and OK. And now we have a map that displays the poverty rate by race and ethnicity for states where we have that data available. Okay. And I'm going to call this one, I'm going to change the name of this worksheet, and I'm going to, so double click where it says Sheet 3 and say poverty by state in 2014. And now I want to take these two pieces that I've created, the map of poverty by race and ethnicity in 2014 by state, and this time series chart I have for the US, and I want to combine it into this visualization that we looked at the beginning, where I've got a title up at the top, some information for users, the legends formatted nicely, and some source information. And for that, there's one more screen that I hadn't shown you at the beginning, and that's the dashboard screen. And dashboards are where you can pull all of that information together into a final polished visualization. To create a dashboard, we're going to click on the new dashboard icon. I'll show you that in just a moment. And really, again, it's just that drag and drop functionality. So let's go ahead and build one. So the new dashboard icon is this. It looks like a 4-pane window with a little plus sign on top of it. Left click there, and you'll see that the worksheets that we've already created show up over here on the left-hand side. So let's bring our map onto the dashboard, and let's bring our time series chart onto the dashboard. And you'll notice as I'm dragging it around, Tableau is giving you a sense of where you're going to be dropping it. So this would drop it on the bottom half of the screen. This would drop it kind of in the middle. This would drop it over on the far right. I want to put it at the bottom. And I also want to add a title to this visualization. So I'm going to left click on this text box option and drag that up to the visualization up to the very top. And I'm going to type a title. Of course, this is not the most creative title I've ever come up with. And you can change the formatting, make it bold, make the text bigger, and click OK. You'll notice Tableau likes to make things bigger sometimes than you want them to be. It is really easy to fix this. You mouse over the edge of that element until your mouse turns into a two-sided arrow. Left click and drag it. You can drag it bigger or smaller depending on what you need. So now we have a title, we have our map, we have our chart. The layout's still kind of a little bit messy. What I really want is this race ethnicity slider across the top. So the first thing they see is that they can go through the map and look at different groups. So if we click on that element, you'll see that you get this little menu bar at the top. We can change some things about the way it's formatted, but also if we mouse over that, you'll see that your mouse pointer turns into a 4-way arrow. If you left click, drag that up to the top. Now we have, again, it's too big, but now we have our race ethnicity selection at the top. Let's left click and drag that to be a little bit smaller. smaller. There we go. We also can, you'll notice again, as I'm dragging items around the interface, that it's showing these sort of gray boxes because Tableau is snapping each of these items into a grid, a predefined sort of layout for us, which can be really useful in keeping your visualization nicely aligned. But sometimes that's not necessarily the way that we want it to work. For example, I want this legend, which is associated with the map. I really want this to appear right here on top of the map. So in order to do, if I try to drag it over, it's just going to put it next to it or underneath it or above it. What I can do, though, is if I left-click in this little tiny white arrow here, I can select floating instead of snapping to the grid. So if I select floating, now I can actually place that map legend right up on top of the map itself. And last but not least, I want to take this race ethnicity label and bring it down here next to the time series chart, this legend. I want this to be as close to the chart as possible. And I want to add some source notes. So I'm going to grab another text box here from the left and drop it right underneath the legend and say source, kids, count, data center, RB, and US Census Bureau. And so I'm going to make that smaller because you want your source notes to be there, but to be smaller than the other stuff. Shrink that down just a little bit, and now we have a data visualization that has our time series chart, has some title and some source information, and has this interactivity that allows users to change the visualization to look at the different race and ethnic groups by state for 2014. And I'm going to call this child poverty. And now we want to be able to share this information with others because it would be really great to create all these visualizations, but if you can't use them or tell your story, that's not really super helpful. So what we want to do is click on File and Save to Tableau Public As, because this is brand new. You can, if you're just updating a viz that already exists, you can just say Save. So let's do Save to Tableau Public As. It's probably going to ask you to log in. And I'm going to call this Child Poverty Rate Demo and save. And it's going to take a couple of moments to publish all the information, and then it's going to pop up an internet browser for us. And this browser gives us a preview of the visualization, and then it also allows us to edit a couple of details. So down here, so edit details, down at the bottom, we can change the title if we didn't like the title that we originally called it. We can add a link back to our website. We can provide a description. And include some additional information here. And we can select whether to show the workbook sheets as tabs or not. And so by keeping this box checked off, what people will see is only this visualization that we have here. If instead we check this box on, they will be able to see each one of these other panes. You may or may not want them to. Sometimes I build workbooks where I have multiple tabs, and that's perfectly fine. Sometimes you just want them to see this final pane that you're publishing, and so you would leave this unchecked and select Save. Take a minute to save any of those changes that we made, and then the last and probably coolest part is that it is also now really easy to share this information. And so there's a little share icon down here at the bottom of the visualization, and you can either select the link and paste it into an email, into a web browser, into a document, and make that link available to people so they can go straight to the Tableau website. Or, and this is probably the coolest feature, if there's embedded code already built into Tableau. So if we select that embed code and copy it, we can go directly to our website, paste that code there, and the visualization is automatically embedded into our website. One other neat feature of Tableau is that if you get partway through building your data visualization and you realize that you have a new year's worth of data that you want to add, or there was an error in one of the data cells that was loaded, you do not need to start again from scratch. You go back to your original data source and you go to Data, and the data source that you're working with is going to show up at the very bottom of that data tab, and click on refresh. I'm not going to do that right now because it's just sort of slow to processing, but if you click on refresh, any edits that you make to your original data table will be uploaded and will filter through all of your visualizations. So easy to publish and really easy to refresh or update if you need to. And there are other ways. So I showed you two ways: sending a link or using the embed link to post, or the embed code to post on your website. There are other ways to share your work, and one of the things I wanted to mention is that the Tableau website has a 4-minute video on doing just that you may want to watch. And they also have a couple of other fairly quick video tutorials that may be useful. So if you go to tableau.com/learn, scroll down to the bottom, there are 3 videos under Getting Started that are really helpful. And then they have a series of videos connecting to data, visual analytics, and others that are free to watch. Watch them as many times as you want. There are some neat tips and tricks in there. So I highly recommend that if you want some additional experience with Tableau before the workshop. And with that, I want to end on the note that I've shown you a fairly quick demo of some basic functionality within Tableau, and you will have some opportunity to do some hands-on stuff next month. But really, the best thing to do is go and play. Take some data. Tableau is free. You have tons of data available at your fingertips from the KidsCat Data Center. Load it into Tableau and try some stuff out. You know, work on looking at different colors and different types of charts and different ways to visualize your results. It's a really neat tool. So with that, I will wrap up my thoughts and turn it over to Mark for questions.
Great, thanks so much, Beth. We do have a few questions that have come in, and it's about 2:43, so we have a little bit of time. Someone asked if there's a way to change the format of the data. So, for example, if they have a 10% value, how to make that show up as 10% and not the decimal 0.10.
Got it. Okay. So like on this worksheet, we've got these decimal numbers that, you know, 0.24. What does that really mean for poverty rate for children in Alaska? So it is possible to change the data format. Here next to data, if we mouse over so that variable is highlighted left, click on that little arrow. Under default, I just lost it. Number format, yeah, it was under default properties. I just need new glasses apparently. Under default properties, there's an option for number format. So left click on data, default properties, number format. And there are a variety of different canned formats here. These look a lot like what we're probably used to working with in Excel. We can click on percentage and change the number of decimal places, and that will change it. One thing to keep in mind when doing that, though, is remember we have filtered out our data to show just percent here. But if instead, and it will change these numbers to percents everywhere, so you can see that it's showing up as a percent here on this chart as well. If this had been edit filter, if we had this as numbers instead of percents, it's going to make all of those numbers appear as percents as well. And so you want to be a little bit careful that when you change the data format here in default properties, it's going to change it for every cell within the data set, not just for the worksheet that you're working on. But you certainly can change it.
Okay. Obviously, a lot of the KidsCat grantees work with sub-state level data, so a couple questions came in about that. One person asked if it's possible to map things like school districts or other non-county sub-state data. Someone else asked specifically about census tracts. since I guess those might not have been listed in those kind of hand geographies that were shown there.
Yeah, this is one of the limitations of working with Tableau, is that you are a little bit limited in the geography types that you have available to you, because you're mapping based on layers that they have already in their online tool. So to the best of my knowledge, it's not yet possible to map census tracts or school districts, but they have a very robust users community, and they do regularly make updates to their tool based on feedback from users. And so I suspect if they got enough requests for school district level mapping, they would make that available. It may also be something that's available in the desktop version of Tableau. What I'm demonstrating here is Tableau Public, which has slightly limited features compared to the desktop version. So there may be, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry, the desktop version may allow people to use custom boundaries and that type of thing.
Exactly. Maybe ways to do custom boundaries in the desktop version that aren't available in public, but the desktop version is also quite expensive.
Mm-hmm. Okay. In the color-coded table, total was shown sorted with the other categories. Is there a way to force that total so it appears at the bottom of the table?
Good question. Okay, so one thing I had meant to go, I'm going to do two things here. One, I had meant to show that you can reorganize the data. There are these little quick sort filters. So if we mouse over the label for location and click on the arrow, it sorts everything alphabetically or numerically. So if I click this one's sorting descending order alphabetically, if I click again, it resorts in alphabetical order, ABC order. Same thing with the race and ethnic labels. I can change them to sort ascending or descending, but then we have this problem of total is showing up between non-Hispanic white and two or more races. You can sort of override the sorting by, if you left click and drag it down, you can force total to be at the bottom of the list.
Okay. Somebody said they had clicked on something and almost all of the data got grayed out, and undo didn't work to bring it back. So how do they get back to their original view?
You mean like this? it just happened when I was doing the sorting. So yes. So one of the things that Tableau does, and this is a feature that actually can be used to highlight something specific. So for example, if I really wanted to put emphasis on this data point for 2006, if I click on it, it highlights this and it grays everything else out around it. But then, like, what do I do? If I click on another cell, it just highlights that cell. What you want to do to undo that selection is find some white space somewhere in the graphic and left click once on that. So if I left click once on the cell and I've accidentally selected it and that's not what I intended to do, I'm going to come up here to the white space and left click again, and that sort of removes that selection that I've made.
Okay. And someone else said they had opened the formatting pane and lost their list of variables. So how did they get that back?
Okay. So if I to open the formatting pane, first of all, right, if you right-click on an element in the data visualization and click on Format, it brings up this option. You can change the font size, you can change the alignment, but you'll notice that our list of available worksheets and available variables is gone. To get that back, and it's actually really annoying that it's gone, to get it back, you click on this X here and it closes the formatting window and it brings that data pane back again.
Okay. I think that's all of our questions. So I just want to thank you, Beth, for taking the time today to talk with us. Obviously, this software has a little bit of a steep learning curve, so like Beth said, I'd encourage people to sort of dive in and experiment. That's often the best way to learn something, and you're not going to break anything by just testing what you can do. So
exactly.
Thanks again. And for those of you, and as I mentioned, this is being recorded. I'll send out the link, if not today. I'll send out the link to everyone who registered today or tomorrow. So I look forward to seeing many of you in St. Louis in the first week of May. Thanks, Beth.
Thank you.